Hello everyone, welcome into CMS Connected, the web content management industry's only news commentary show. Glad you guys could join us. I am Tyler Pyburn of the Pulse Network. We've got a pretty awesome show to kind of kick things off for the year 2013. We're going to be talking about, well, pretty much what everybody's been talking about. Some of the predictions, trends, hot topics of the web CMS industry. And of course, joining me in this fine studio right now, we welcome in Scott Liewehr of Digital Clarity Group. Scott, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Good turn of the year. We're going to kick things off right?
It is, yeah. Nice and cold outside, just like January should be, right?
Oh, I hate that kind of thought. But yes, it is in fact going to be talking about the predictions, trends, and hot topics of 2013. And of course, putting on this show is some of our fine sponsors. And we're going to tell you about some of those fine sponsors in a second. But coming up a little bit later on in the show, we're going to have some great commentary from some of the industry's best. Going to be joining us in studio is Cathy McKnight, partner and principal analyst at Digital Clarity Group, as well as Bryan from CMS Report. He's going to be doing In the Spotlight, and today In the Spotlight is going to be all about Joomla. But of course, I mentioned those sponsors that do in fact put on this great show and help make this thing really all come together. First off, we have to acknowledge Falcon Software. Now, Falcon provides creative design, e-commerce, web content management, social and mobile solutions for organizations across the globe, as well as Digital Clarity Group. DCG is a research and advisory firm focused on navigating organizations through the digital transformation process. Now, before we get started, I want to say one thing in particular. I highly recommend you guys do this. Wait till after the show, though. Okay, so take a look down on this actual player page. You see the video player just below it. You guys are going to be able to find an option to go ahead and download a free white paper. It is basically all about how to select a web CMS, and it's based upon our talk from last month. Now, Scott, kind of summarize last month's talk. I mean, it was awesome. It's been out for about a month now. We've had some really cool and interesting feedback. I've seen a lot of people already tweeting about it, talking about it. And this is just another instance so they can go ahead and kind of relive that.
Yeah, it's gotten a whole lot of attention. It's not a white paper, it's in fact a video, right? So maybe a video white paper.
The white paper is based on the video.
Oh, right, okay, gotcha, yeah. So I think it's a good, I mean, look, we help to talk through it, but it's an 8-step process essentially that takes you through how to select a CMS, whether you are working with somebody or whether you are doing it in isolation and taking it on yourself. I think it's a pretty good approach.
Yeah, definitely. So again, highly advise you guys to go ahead and download that. It's just below the player page. Take a look at it. You're going to have some great tips of the trade, really, to go ahead and select a web CMS. So let's go ahead and let's kind of get things started, and let's talk about some of the news from around the CMS industry. And to kind of kick things off, let's, Gartner revisiting their global IT spending predictions. So first off, on January 3rd, David Rowe posted an article on CMS Wire suggesting that the economic problems that have kind of dogged IT spending over the past year actually could be over right now. So now, according to predictions by Gartner, spending overall this year is going to be $3.7 trillion. These are the stats. I got to look down for these to make sure I have them right. Up 4.2% on last year. More importantly, Gartner's previous prediction of 3.8%. Now, he actually goes on to say that the spending drive, it seems, will be led by spending on devices. Really no surprises there. And enterprises. It's got numbers pretty interesting to see, to say the least, right?
Yeah, sure. I think what we basically saw, though, and as he points out in the article, that some of this increase is actually due to the struggling dollar against foreign currencies. Yeah. So we're seeing, global IT spend, and as those other currencies are actually improving against the dollar, we're seeing the U.S. dollar number go up. But it actually, even in isolation, even aside from the whole currency factor, there certainly still is good news here. I think there's an awful lot of enterprises out there who were kind of hoarding cash for a while, trying to figure out where this economy was going to go, and getting themselves entrenched for kind of a long and tedious ride. And I think finally now we're starting to see them open up their purses a little bit more in spending. So yeah, sure.
No, I mean, one of the things I've said in the past is, we talk about IT spending, and IT spending overall, I mean, that could literally mean almost anything that falls under IT. But what about, from the WCM space? Are these good numbers for this space in particular, or no?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think there's a number of, like you said, we talked actually I think a couple of months ago about IT spending increasing, and one of the things we talked about was even though we're talking about spending on technology, it's not always by technologists. We're seeing a lot more line of business teams out there spending money and leading some of these large scale purchases of software. Also, I think working with an awful lot of organizations as we talk about a world like a CXM where it's very engagement based and very interaction with the audience based. You're seeing a lot of technologies have to come together, which increases the amount of services spend. So that kind of also falls into that IT sector.
And actually, this goes back to what we talked about last month about how marketing has to be on the same on the same page as
That's
IT
right.
in order to go ahead and do that. And this is where that spending is coming from, a lot specifically for the WCM space, right?
That's right. As they look more and more to technology to kind of fuel their campaigns and interactions and experiences of customers, you're seeing things like, certainly there is, and I think we should save and talk about the device aspect of this. There's a lot of spending on devices, and we can talk about that in a second. But I also think things like big data, which I have talked a little bit about and been a little bit of a naysayer for a marketer. Is it that important? But we're certainly seeing enterprises spend an awful lot of money in the big data space, where it's about collecting, harvesting, being able to analyze and hoard this data and capture it from all over the place. We're seeing the big data as a sector require an awful lot of spend in it as well.
Okay, so let's go ahead and let's move on to the next point we're going to be talking about. That is enterprise embracing open source. Now, this is obviously a topic of discussion that we almost seem to hit every single month, and that's just somewhere around comes back to open source and what people's thoughts are. Is it ready for enterprise? Is it not? Now, Anthony Myers, a San Francisco-based columnist, wrote an article on Forrester's findings on how enterprise companies are actually starting to embrace open source web content management. Now, in the article, actually, Scott, he actually talks about how cloud services provider Acquia, who we're going to talk about Acquia a little bit later on in the show as well, has commissioned a Forrester report on open source WCM, and while the results aren't really overwhelming right now, it does show more enterprise companies are employing open source systems. Nearly 60% of the companies of the 160 companies surveyed said that they actually had at least considered an open source for their WCM programs. That's kind of interesting when you see that. They've considered it, right? We've considered it. Yeah. I don't know if they've necessarily actually gone ahead and done it, though.
Yeah. So I think, at least to have least considered it, that it's, sponsored by Acquia. Of course, they were looking for a particular outcome of this. And Forrester is not in the business of leaning in any direction. But, I think to have considered it, everybody can say that they considered it. In fact, the fact that number is low is a little bit worrisome because I guess the point that I'll make about this is that it's legitimate, that you should be considering it. So if it is only 60% considering, I think that number should actually increase because we're seeing a fair stable of open source products that are out there that are more and more so improving themselves and being able to appeal more and more to the enterprises. I think an interesting point about this too, Tyler, is that we just talked about IT spend increasing, right? And now we're talking about more and more folks looking to open source. You'd think that those kind of, I'm sorry. Why don't you ask a smart question?
But it is honestly that's true because we just talked about, okay, they're looking to spend and hopefully it's going to be up and it's going to be from the enterprise specifically. Yet we're talking right now, well, guess what? The enterprise is looking for the freebies, right? They're looking for the open source. I mean, not necessarily free. But.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good sign, though, because number one, it means that this, certainly there is an aspect of open source having an appeal from a spend standpoint. Now, don't get it twisted. With the implementation and all that kind of stuff, certainly overall, you're still going to spend an awful lot of money. It just might be more OpEx than CapEx sort of a thing. But nonetheless, I still think that the trend with open source upwards in the enterprise, and we are still seeing an increase in spend overall, those 2 points would seem to counter each other. So I think the latter actually makes the spend even more impressive, frankly. The fact that some of our spend now is on things that otherwise don't have much of a CapEx to them, I think that actually makes the first number even more impressive when we talk about upward trends.
Now, from the other side of it, do you think companies like the Ectrons, the SDLs, Sitecors, they should actually worry about something like this? They see this and they say, okay, no worries, or do they actually have to stop and think about this?
They should absolutely be worried, and not because I don't think that worried is a weird term, but there's a lot of room to play here, and there's an appeal for everybody. But I do think for sure they've learned a lot from the open source approach. I think the need to be able to attract a community of people who embrace your product and are looking to innovate on it, looking to do things in a nuanced way and then be able to share that back with others, is something that the proprietary vendors are having to learn. It's not something that comes natural to them. It's not a part of how they came to be. I think in the appeal for the proprietary folks, sorry, for what the open source needs to do is more involve some of the maturity of the ensuring the testing is thorough and diligent and all those sorts of things. So I think both are learning, but unquestionably, open source is right at their heels, are pushing the envelope on a lot of things like user experience and those sorts of things that are really making proprietary vendors have to consider that. And I think that they're dealing with them head to head in more and more of these sorts of things. I don't think that the open source solutions are all about handling the same level of complexity all the time, but sometimes those differences in capabilities fall on deaf ears in terms of the ultimate consumer as they go to these kind of checkbox sorts of do you have this capability, that functionality, this functionality.
Which we just talked about on
They
our
don't
last
look
show.
so different on paper now. So the fact, again, that more aren't considering them is a little bit worrisome. They definitely should be, but I do think there's different use cases.
Now, does this mean anything for like the implementers? As far as when we look at Acquia specifically, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
What's that mean?
They actually are in a bit of a different role now when you talk about an open source, because usually your implementer now is kind of much more owning your implementation, right? Because a lot of the things they've done, they've customized for you, and they're, the innovation on those open source products oftentimes is happening through the implementers who are really kind of boots on the ground, like an Acquia with Drupal, boots on the ground doing that, and they're sometimes refactoring or tailoring a particular portion of the tool for a vertical segment, that sort of stuff. So they're all about making putting that tool to use in the enterprises, and so they play a really critical role in terms of the evolution of the product.
All right, so let's move on and let's talk about Oracle and Eloqua. So first off, Oracle agreed to acquire the software company Eloqua for about $810 million as the company continues to bolster its cloud-based market analysis products. Now founded in 2000, Eloqua provides software that allows clients to measure the effectiveness of marketing and sales efforts. It's all about measurement with these guys. So Scott, I know you actually interviewed a couple weeks back, was in B2B magazine, I believe.
Yeah.
Kind of give me your thoughts on some of the benefits of this deal itself.
Sure. I didn't exactly love the quotes that I was given. They were probably mine, but I think they were kind of narrow-sighted, even based on a really long conversation. But I think that this is interesting for a number of aspects. Certainly from Oracle's perspective, they are, and Cathy wrote about this as well, we'll have on later. She wrote on our blog a post about this adding to the suite of capabilities for them. With Fatware acquisition, with Endeca acquisition, Eloqua now just adds one more piece for them. They've got also Vitru, we talked about, social media marketing, a number of things. So I think that this is really interesting from Oracle's rounding out their suite perspective. I don't know how well they're going to necessarily integrate. It's certainly something that in any one of these acquisitions there's always a challenge of is, to what degree do they actually integrate some of the tools into a true suite? Are they just really kind of pulling it in under their umbrella and creating it as an offer? Or are they really, and so it being cloud-based as well, I think is another real element here. It's good and bad, right? The good is it continues to push Oracle out there in kind of less of an on-premise, more of a cloud-savvy organization, and it's enhancing their abilities out in the cloud as they actually have put Fatwire in the cloud, a number of other capabilities. The downside to it, though, is that for Eloqua customers, the barrier to exit is much lower when you're in a SaaS model, and it's literally just a subscription. It wasn't a big, huge implementation for them. It was services-wise, but they're probably using a relatively, we see a lot of Eloqua users, really only kind of just getting the surface of its capabilities. And so it's not heavily entrenched in the organization yet, and where they might be scared off by an Oracle, frankly. Oracle isn't exactly the best brand in the world from a marketer's perspective. They've often seen Oracle as causing their pain, they think. When they talk to their IT people, they see it associated with negative things maybe, and you could see them easily jump ship. So I don't think Oracle made this acquisition to go and get a new client base, per se. I think it was just really to round out their suite.
Well, you mentioned that, to round out their suite. So for me, from an outsider, I look at this and I say, okay, they're trying to round out their suite, and they're saying, okay, we're going to create all these great companies, and we're going to have these underneath our umbrella.
Right.
To me, that looks like, well, I'm going to go right up against someone like a Salesforce.
Yeah.
Does this mean they can compete, or is it just, well, we've got the tools and we're just going to say that we can?
Yeah, I sent some tweet on the day that this was announced to the effect of essentially the Marketo people all jumping and clicking their heels at this, because now they're kind of the best primed next option to be purchased and acquired. And both Eloqua and Marketo actually had Marketo, by the way, is the biggest kind of competitor to them in the marketing automation space. And I think that it's interesting because both of them actually had fairly good relationships with Salesforce.com, for example. And I think that you'll probably see some sort of Marketo being certainly looked at by an awful lot more vendors, maybe specifically Salesforce, maybe others. Even SAP is trying to get into this space, a number of others who are fewer options out there to go swallow up now. So I think they're probably primed and ready, Marketo is.
There we go.
Told you.
We're looking into the crystal ball right now.
By the way, they're happy to take their customers, I'm quite sure.
Definitely. Oh, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about transitioning, into the next story, and that's we're going to be transitioning away from OpenText. Now, the reason we're saying this is because on January 8th, Tony Byrne from Real Story Group actually posted an article about OpenText Red Dot 3 years later. Now, Byrne said that at any given time, it seems that we're advising at least a couple of major enterprises as they transition away from OpenText website management, aka Red Dot. Now, he goes on to say, we stopped covering Red Dot in 2010 after OpenText tried to more or less hide the product in favor of the Vignette platform acquired. Now, OpenText still supports a now mostly European base of Red Dot licenses, but that base shrinks yearly and has completely evaporated here in North America. Now, Scott, with that in mind, I'm sure it's painful for Red Dot partners to kind of come to grips with, but the pain for Red Dot customer must be far worse right now, right? I mean, what exactly be your thoughts on that?
So
I see the smile too, so I'm
this
anxious.
is a discussion. Look, this is a discussion very worth having, but let's not overstate the situation today. To say that the U.S. market has completely evaporated for Red Dot is an extreme overstatement, and the person who wrote that article, that group is known for kind of putting these kind of rather extreme statements out there. So I would not take on face value that position. That being said, I do agree that we are also seeing, I think I'm working right now with 2 clients who are moving off of the Red Dot system. Really? Now, so is this a mass exit? I think it's been happening since. I think OpenText, frankly, handled this acquisition relatively poorly because it is their lack of putting out information and working with analysts like myself and others to kind of let them know what the strategy is that has kind of caused some of folks like the person who wrote that article, Tony Byrne, to speculate a bit because they're not getting information from the source per se, so you can only say what you presume. So I think communication has been rather poor. That being said, and since OpenText also acquired Vignette, I guess about 2 years ago now or so, post Red Dot acquisition, it seemed like Red Dot was the redheaded stepchild of that situation, where kind of they were then promoting Vignette more so than they were Red Dot, and everybody wondered about its place. I think what it could have been, and this is not an original thought by me. I think Timothy Davis wrote a blog post about this. He actually is an OpenText employee and wrote a blog post kind of countering the one that Tony wrote that has some interesting points. One of them was it actually reduces the pressure, the Vignette purchase, which was granted 2 years ago now, reduces the pressure on the Red Dot team to try to get it to become something that it's not. OpenText customers tend to be larger enterprises, more complex environments, and Red Dot wasn't necessarily targeted well towards that use case particularly. So it actually, having Vignette there kind of allows them to have a more mid-market solution as well as a more enterprise or complex solution. And so Red Dot no longer has to kind of become something that it's not. Okay. So I think that's an interesting take. That being said, they are apparently working on it pretty hard. The news that we're getting is they realize that there is kind of, as Tim talks about a kind of a technology debt that they owe, that they've kind of fallen behind some of the other competitors that they have. And so apparently they're working pretty hard to try to, modernize a bit the system. And so we'll see what happens with it. I think, I leave it up to OpenText to come out and really tell us what the plans are for both of these 2 solutions. And they've done that to a degree, but just not in a real meaningful way. They've put a lot of emphasis behind it.
All All right. So the very last story we're going to go ahead and get to is talking about Facebook Graph. This is something that a lot of you on the social channels out there have been talking about, and it's interesting to see, to say the least. So in case you have not heard about the announcement made by Mark Zuckerberg at his latest press conference, it actually is Graph Search. It essentially the new tool that allows Facebook users to conduct extremely granular searches across their own Facebook graph. Now, it was introduced just a little while ago, actually delivered the much anticipated press. And people are wondering, are we trying to say that's the Google killer? Is it just because we're trying to figure out more about our people, or is it just to show off that Mark Zuckerberg does in fact have all this data about all these people?
Yeah.
What do you kind of think about this?
So I have a fair amount of thought. I think we should look at this from a couple of
we
perspectives.
could do an entire show on
We
this.
could.
Yeah,
There's no
very
question
easily.
that we could, and there certainly has been enough print about it. Yes, you mentioned that some were disappointed about the announcement, and I think that's because, look, Facebook is now a public company. Public companies operate differently than they can when they're private companies. They no longer control their own agenda. They have a higher authority to have to deal with and work with, and that being the market. So perception is key for them. So they, for a long time, baited everybody and said, hey, come and listen to this big announcement that we're going to have. So then there was tons of speculation about that, what it would be. Oh, by the way, driving up the stock price a bit in anticipation of it. And so people were talking about, oh, is there going to be a Facebook phone? Their mobile presence has been relatively poor, and they've been beat up about that. Are they going to improve that?
Trust in theory, and that's right there. They're saying, okay, well, one of the biggest companies out there right now is going to have this major announcement. What is it going to be?
That's right.
That's theory, that's predictions, and hopefully that drives it up. We knew there was going to be negative news coming out.
That's
So
right.
as far as market's concerned, that's a positive thing.
Right.
But what does this actually mean for marketers out there? Because this is actually the more important part of it all.
It is, and especially from our perspective and from our audience. So our audiences are two types of folks. We're all Facebook users. So from the Facebook user perspective, I think, frankly, I think the jury is out, and that's what a lot of the cynicism is about how useful this is going to be for the individuals. Because basically you can go and it taps into your network of people that are associated with you, and you might want to say, okay, let me go find a movie that my friends have liked that's playing whatever now. And so those are the types of searches, might be looking for a restaurant advice or something. I think the challenge, so they're basically saying it's looking for use cases, and I think the challenge that many say is, is this going to really help the user that much? Are they thirsting for this sort of searchability? And frankly, if you think about, Tyler, how Facebook has always kind of positioned itself, you have Twitter and stuff that you can follow. Everybody have these huge networks. Most people now that, keep out of this conversation, the 14 and 15-year-olds who have these gigantic networks. But most people like me and you, I think, hold relatively closely the people that we include in our network on Facebook, right?
Yep.
And so, frankly, then you have a much smaller sample size, right? And so to be able to say, then let me search that group to find restaurant things, you're going to have a very small sample size to kind of get information, as opposed to a Google that looks much further and wider, right? And doesn't only look at your close network. So I think, frankly, the results are going to be relatively sparse for many people.
And what about for, those are people. Now, it's kind of to be seen as what it's going to be for brands, though. So say, take a Pepsi, because that's the big one. Pepsi's going to have X amount of followers. Think about how many million people probably follow Pepsi. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you take someone like that, or Coke, whoever you want to say, are they able to then go ahead and see what their people are talking about, what they're thinking about, what their likes, dislikes, so on and so forth?
And I don't know that it applies necessarily for brands who have followers. I think it's more about an actual network of connected folks. But there is an API, nonetheless, that should allow a brand to tap into, you're right, so from the marketer perspective, a brand to tap into, what are people's likes, such that now when they get this person, they actually have an understanding of their affinity for certain things. And I think it's a real, look, that's who they did this for. Facebook is disguising this as a user feature, and in fact, it is a way to continue to monetize for them, right? The only thing they had before was advertising to be able to monetize, and frankly, the advertising was, I don't think, so stellar. You had, look, we've done a little promotion on Facebook at DCG, and I just got a bunch of 13-year-olds signing up and liking my page. The targeting options, nope. The targeting options, were very limited, only with what people kind of had associated themselves with. It was much much less about kind of the inference that you make about their likes and dislikes based on their behaviors, and more a check the box, did I say that I was a technology consultant sort of a thing, and therefore kind of. So this is all about monetizing for them. This is all about that API that's going to allow marketers to tap into it and use the social graph to essentially be able to sell their products and push it out more meaningfully.
Right. Excellent. There we go. We could definitely easily do an entire show on this, just judging by your comments alone, which would be great, whether you think it's a fail, whether they're trying too hard, or whether that, hey, maybe you actually like what they're doing. To be seen. So we're going to move ahead on right now, and now we're going to get to the segment that everybody really has been, in fact, been waiting for, and that is focused on some of those prediction trends and hot topics for 2013. And to kind of help us with this portion, we're going to have another one from Digital Clarity Group, the partner and principal analyst at DCG, Cathy McKnight. Now on January 2nd, Cathy actually posted an article on the website called Peering into 2013. So today, we are in fact going to be doing exactly that. So we, of course, we welcome into the show who just so eloquently just slid right into the chair so silently. I'm sure you guys didn't hear one bit. That was excellent. Cathy, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. I'm doing very well.
Excellent. So first off, kind of tell me your thoughts on this piece that you put together. Kind of break it down for me. Was it just kind of saying, hey, I'm opening up the crystal ball and this is what we're going to be looking towards?
Oh, I wish we had a crystal ball. Wouldn't that be amazing? No, actually, it was a conglomeration of thoughts. Myself, Robert Rose, and Tim Walters, who are our partners with DCG, we did a brain meld together and passed some stuff around, and that's what you got.
So the way I'm going to kind of set this up is I'm going to read some of the different parts from the actual post itself, and I just want to kind of have you guys kind of give me your thoughts and go from there, really. So first off, what are the deeper predictions? You know, the web content management nomenclature fog will finally begin to lift as bigger vendors further embrace some variation of customer experience engagement management for their expanding suites, and WCM becomes identified with web channel-centric projects. Explain that a little bit for me.
Wow, it sounds so much more impressive when you hear it sounded out loud. That's really about companies, vendors, SDL, Adobe, IBM moving towards the customer engagement management and looking to embrace those elements. So moving beyond web content management, really, and bringing new elements on. Some companies aren't doing that, which is fine. There's always going to be a place for them. But really, it's about taking the next step and providing enterprise services.
So with you, and I'll pitch this to you here. There's still, you kind of said that in there, but so we're seeing these WCM companies start to expand the bounds of what is WCM, and when you're saying that we're going to continue to see that. Is there still, though, room for those kind of more pure play web content management players?
Oh, absolutely. I think moving forward, there's always going to be a place for those who really stick to that web content management, something that has the features and functionalities of managing content on the web, not looking at the experience management or the engagement side of things, diving deeper. A lot of them talk about social and different channels, but really what they are is a web content management system, and that's what a lot of companies are still going to be looking for. They're not going to want all the bells and whistles.
Okay, excellent. Now you talk about all the bells and whistles. Let's move on to the next point. That was looking at it from a holistic approach, really. And this actually, Scott, goes into what we talked about just 1 month ago when we were talking about, okay, how to select a web CMS. Yep. You're not necessarily just looking at the vendor, you're looking at the implementer as well. Right. So this is one of those things that you said more companies are going to start looking at that. Is it just because of Scott's advice? Is that
Absolutely.
the only reason why? Yes, all right, there we go.
That's our
He's got gospel. He says it's gospel. No, what that is a lot of companies start with the technology, which, it's the way it's been done. We're not sure why. We all agree at DCG that really you've got to look at the partnership as a whole. So from that perspective, we'd like to see a shift, and I think it's happening and I think one of the reasons is companies looking to buy a web content management system, it's an easier thing to look at. You know what kind of features and functionalities you want. There's tons of websites that'll give you a comparison for that and say, yes, this company has it, this vendor doesn't. And it's also relatively easy to put a price tag on it. When you start talking about the service provider, how do you find one? There's so many. Who do you reach out to? How do you factor in the price? So it's not as tangible. So it gets pushed to the side sometimes.
Sure. So what I think, I think, look, I obviously think that you're spot on with this. That's a really smart prediction.
I can't believe you agree with this. Yeah.
No, but why? So why though? This is what we deal with every single day, and we take this into heart in terms of our selections, where we're looking at both. But why, for so many, is it taking them so long to embrace that side of it? I mean, you said it's kind of relatively easy to look at the capabilities of a technology, but why wouldn't they look to the capabilities of an organization that's going to help them implement it?
I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is they don't know where to start. So how do you pick a vendor, or how do you pick a service provider, right? A lot of companies will default to the one they know. So they've had a long-standing relationship. They have an agency of record. They say they can do it. So it's a lot easier just to go to the top of the pile. Great, they can do it. Internal teams often say, oh yeah, we can put that in. When they can't, essentially, they need the support and building relationship. I think some business sides of the purchasing, the company that's buying the vendor, the technology, again, they look at that as, well, that's the IT side of the house. They're the ones who are going to implement it, so they need to find the provider. Whereas it really is a relationship. It's a long-term thing. You're going to spend some time with the technology vendor. You're going to spend a long time with the service provider. So building that relationship with all parties, internal IT, the business side, as well as the service provider, is really, really important.
Definitely. So one of the points in particular that we're going to move on to right now is, we talk about almost, it seems like every month, whether it be in the news segment or inside of the rapid fire segment, we talk all about acquisitions, and there seems to be so many different acquisitions in the marketplace right now, plus a lot of disruption from some of the content marketing technology assets out there as well. And you guys basically talked about that's going to be furthering to blur the lines between marketing automation and web content management, which a few more WCM, kind of bites the dust in a sense, right?
Right, so definitely they're coming into play now, and you look at content curation, editorial management, those are things that blend really nicely with a WCM. So those are things that you want to take care of, not only from a marketing content perspective, but from an overall web content perspective. So there's a really nice mesh there with web content management systems. Same with marketing automation. There's a lot of interaction, same channels and whatnot, so it makes sense to pull those together. So I think the time has come to see those things blending and merging together.
Now, is this because right now, it's something that we've actually talked about a couple times now, Scott, is this because the marketers are now the driving force as opposed to just IT? Because that's one of the things before IT would say, okay, well, we need this platform because it's easy to work with. Whereas now the marketers are demanding, well, I want the curation. I want all these parts, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those who are providing the content want to manage the content now. It used to be that you send it off via email and magically it showed up on your website.
Hey, that still happens. If you're still doing that, it's okay.
Yeah. Decentralized, centralized, how you manage your content is up to you. But having that capability to put the content in the hands of those who understand it and own it is really important, and you'll find much more effective communications marketing, changes on the fly that adapt to the analytics that are coming in. It just makes sense.
Bottom line makes sense, right?
Yeah, bottom line. What else
You heard it here.
Heard it. Okay, let's move on. So marketing automation platforms will extend their functionality so that the technology can be leveraged beyond the early stages of the customer relationship lifecycle. Kind of explain that a little bit for me.
Okay, so inbound and outbound marketing. Very much marketing automation has been focused on the outbound, sending out emails, blasts, connecting with people through social channels and whatnot. What they haven't been doing is leveraging the inbound marketing. So I think there was a study back in 2010 that showed the disbursement of resources was 90-10 to outbound versus inbound. That's seeing a shift. Once you have those customers, you want to keep them. You want to work on customer relationships. You want to look at loyalty programs. You want to look at retention. That's done via inbound marketing, and you need to spend some time on that. Marketing automation platforms have so much to offer. Like a lot of CMSs, people use 10, 15, maybe 20% of what the platform has to offer. And if companies can start, vendors of marketing automation can really start teaching their buyers on how to use that from an inbound marketing perspective, they'll see a whole new area that they can leverage that technology.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is kind of which one is causing this evolution? Is it because you see the technology vendors out there basically going and saying, this is how folks should be using our tools, and we haven't enabled this very well thus far, so we're going to improve? Or is it that the marketers are demanding to be able to do more and more inbound things, and that loyalty and the evangelization that we've all been spinning about customer experience and that sort of stuff, as they're put into the owners of that experience more so than just filling the top of the funnel? Which one do you think is leading which?
I think it's a mixture of both, which is totally sitting on the fence, so I apologize.
Having both allows you to prediction the twice as likely to come true,
That's
so
right.
you're fine.
So chances are of me being right are good ones. I think some of the bigger players in the marketing automation space get it and are moving forward in that direction, which again is starting to create the chatter for those who are using and saying, you're right. And I think also the internal shift of the marketing, the CMOs of the world looking at saying, listen, we have to focus on inbound marketing. We need to get more presence from that perspective and tying in those messages. So I think it's a bit of both.
Now, are companies buying off on that still? Because I wonder, from our company itself, you look at people that talk about inbound marketing. A lot of CMOs who are fluent in digital do understand that, but there are still some, I hate to use the word legacy CMOs out there that still haven't bought off on that idea of, well, how can I leverage the power of the inbound marketing? I still want to send emails. I want that kind of connection. And I think, one of the terms I actually heard was almost real-time inbound marketing, kind of those real-time results. Talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a smaller faction on that side who really get it and are moving towards refocusing on that inbound. It used to be all inbound, then it was all outbound, and it's that pendulum. It shifts back and forth. So definitely I do see some of the more avant-garde CMOs getting it and moving forward in that direction. You're always going to have some who are going to wait and see what others are doing, what their competition are doing. But in the big picture, I think I'll take a firm stand on this, that we're going to see a shift in the resources move towards more inbound marketing, and the technology has to follow if it's not already there.
Awesome. Great. Good to know. Okay, well, you talked about some of the big players in the space. Let's talk about startups, because one of the points you made was that talent shortages in the tech and marketing space will actually going to become a real issue for some of the startups out there. Talk to that.
Yeah, and you know what? That's not just startups. We're seeing resources being really scarce all over the place. So people are being put into roles that have a much larger scale of what they have to do. They're being taken out of their sweet spot and asked to, if you're a pure technologist, asked to understand the content side of things. As a marketer, you need to have more and more tech savvy to understand how to use the technology, which ones have what to offer, especially in the selection process. And also just in general, you look at the demands coming for people coming out of school. We're looking for a skill set that doesn't even exist, that isn't being taught in universities and colleges. And so where do you find that?
Inbound Marketing 101 doesn't exist just yet?
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe in some schools. But certainly when you're looking at, you take the big picture when somebody needs to understand analytics and marketing and content management, maybe a little bit of technology, HTML, XML, things like that. What program offers that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on that it's not just about startups. It really is about the entire pool of resources and the skills that have to change across. We've talked a lot about data so much is fueling things, and whether it's ROI searches or expectations, big data coming to the foray. You're having everybody need to be an analyst now, right? Some sort of a data analyst these days, and we certainly have seen even some of the major WCM players out there having a difficult time getting projects off the ground as they're looking for resources as well. So, we talked about Acquia, Drupal folks and stuff like that. They're all they're having a hard time finding folks who know those platforms well.
Well, yeah, and so many people have been in scale down mode, and now things are turning around and more projects are it's time to change technology and whatnot, and they don't have the resources to put them in. So.
Well, let's talk about this now, because marketers, and you talk about inbound marketing, one of their biggest problems with the inbound marketing standpoint is they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, these people are here, how do I score them as a lead? Where do they actually fit on the chain, right? And that's one of the points that you actually made was this is going to mature. It's going to continue to mature in this point in time, right? Because we haven't gotten to a point just yet where we know a little bit about some of their data, but we don't necessarily know, are they buyers just yet, specifically from that found point.
Yeah, reading digital body language is tough, and sales don't want the loose leads. They want something that's baked. They want them qualified. You don't just hand over, this is everybody that came to our website. So from a lead analytics perspective, the expectation is from that very first click, you know everything there is to know about that individual. And you can, more and more with big data, more data sources and more data points coming together, being able to pull them together is really, really important in that it brings the marketers an opportunity not just to look at the web information and that digital body language, but also other touch points to really get a bigger picture. So they want to fine tune it right down to the point where they can, blue eyes, 5'5", blonde hair.
And they want to match it up with their personas too, right?
Exactly.
We want to make sure that, hey, I've got the right people that are actually coming in, and that actually helps their marketing plans too. after the fact, because you're measuring and say, okay, who are the people that are actually been brought in? Are these the people that I've been trying to reach this entire time? Or is it just, like Scott said, is it the 13-year-old girl that's on Facebook that happened to click the box because they have to be there?
Followers.
We have no experience.
But I think Jeff Cram sent a tweet last week or 2 weeks ago that I retweeted, and I think a fair amount of folks did as well, which basically he said, leads are people. Just don't forget that. Like, we realize that these tools are being used by marketers and by salespeople to fill their funnels and try to move things along. But I think it's called engagement management to a degree for a reason. It's if you can create that engagement, just get them interacting with you, provide value, be relevant, those sorts of things. Eventually the sales can kind of come. But if you're looking only at this as like, did they buy, did they not? And I think so we're seeing the tools evolve to start to include and embrace more of that and kind of create the relationship and the longevity more so than just in around.
Yeah, and another point to that is the more and more we try and automate things, the less and less we have that human touch. And marketing really is about a human touch. And really, should that big picture marketing be automated? Yes, there's certain things absolutely, but you've got to put a human face and touch in there at some point. And that line is getting very blurry as to where that is.
Well, think about it. I mean, the way it used to be scored was like, talk to them on the phone, that's, somewhat of a lead. If I talk to them in person, that's a warm lead. I mean, it's the exact same thing because you had that touch. You actually know a little bit more about them. So one of the things I want to do is kind of jump ahead right now. And one of the things you also talked about was kind of going global. And the next frontier of content marketing and audience engagement goes global as brands start to try and figure out how to localize thought leadership and engagement.
Yeah, you can tell that's a Robert Rose one.
I was going to say, I can almost see his, the long locks kind of flowing right now.
That's right.
The glasses, yeah.
That's right. So I hope I do this justice for Robert. Certainly. So from that standpoint, again, we've centralized so much. So we've brought resources in, and we have our marketing team, global marketing team, sitting in LA, or we have them sitting in New York, or we have them sitting in Toronto. And what we don't have are feet on the ground to where we're actually trying to get our customers and clients. So while there's a lot of messages that, and they test them and they market test them and they bring in focus groups and they, does this resonate, and make sure it doesn't mean a bad thing in a different language. And then they send it out. What they don't do is really see the reaction of people on the ground. So we're going to see a shift where that local marketing team is really important, so that they're putting a face to the name locally to that brand, because while brand awareness is one thing, brand loyalty is a completely different other thing, and that requires that human interaction and that interpretation, and you need that local presence.
For sure. I remember for years with Gil Bannon, as I was putting together the plan for the conference, Mary LaPlante was there, and she's been an analyst in the globalization space for a long time, and she was always kind of wanting to demand, she had to kind of force herself into having a topic or two that were on globalization, and they weren't very well attended. And now people are thirsting for that information. So more and more brands are really realizing this globalization. And as we talk about the process and the practice of content marketing, the implication on being global, right, and being very locally relevant is that much more difficult of an obstacle to overcome, right?
Yeah, so you have to keep an eye on the global because you want that consistency, but you have to localize it so it means something to the people that you're actually reaching out to.
Sure. So one of the things, the very last point that we want to bring up was, the owned media partnerships, because this was actually a pretty interesting point. Brands are actually starting to kind of co-brand, whether it be through an outpost, through things of that nature. They're trying to reach more audiences, trying to get even more eyeballs by kind of co-branding. Is this going to work, though? I know that, this is, I keep looking at this and say, okay, the idea seems right.
Yes.
We're going to hit a wide variety, but, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
This is like brand placement gone wild. So
Yeah.
think about the movies that we watch, and we know whether Ford or Volvo or Mercedes has been Coca-Cola or Pepsi. You never see both.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
So this is taking that one step further. So this is think about the Coca-Cola polar bears wearing Dr. Dre headphones.
Beats, yeah.
This is pulling two brands that have some kind of synergy and some like audience together and taking their combined reach and moving it forward. So, and it's a relatively, from a cost perspective, it's less expensive than trying to go out and get that brand new or that expanded audience on your own, because you're doing it mutually together with another company. So, sometimes there's not even a cost, it's just a mutual agreement to do it together. Yeah. So the bottom line, you're hitting a lot more people with not a lot of cost.
I'm so stuck on it. And what's interesting is you just mentioned a couple B2C companies. Will it work the same way for B2B as well? Because that's where I think things are really going to get tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
going to ask the same
Go
question.
ahead. I thought you were going to comment.
Yeah, I can. I can. But I was going to ask the same question: is what's the relevance for B2B marketers that are out there, and is something like this? Is this a strategy that they're taking on as well?
Oh, I think it's totally relevant to B2B. They talk about marketing automation as to whether or not that is strictly a B2C or a B2B. Again, I think it works B2B as well. And I think this brand tandeming, pulling things together, I think we're going to see that B2B combination as well. We're going to, can't think of one, of course, pressure of being on TV off the top of my head, but I think it's as applicable to B2B as it is for B2C.
It's interesting, really is. Cathy, honestly, thank you so much for coming by. I know you took a long flight to get here, so I appreciate you coming by.
No worries.
Thank
I love
you so
coming to
much.
Boston. Boston's one of my favorite cities. So.
Okay, good to hear. So that right there, folks, Cathy McKnight of Digital Clarity Group. Big thanks for her taking time out of the day to jump on the show with us. So now we do, in fact, have to move on, and we are going to go in the spotlight. We're going to be reviewing Joomla right now. Joomla is a free and open source content management system for publishing content web and intranets, and a model view controller web application framework that can also be used independently. Now, Joomla is written in PHP, uses object-oriented programming techniques, software design patterns, and stores in a MySQL database. Now, as of March 2012, Joomla has been downloaded over 30 times. Over 10,000 free and commercial extensions are available from the official Joomla extension directory. Now, it's also estimated to be the second most used CMS on the internet after WordPress. So those are a couple of interesting things right now. So we're going to talk to Scott in just a few seconds about this. But first, we have to bring on Bryan Ruby of CMS Report. Bryan, welcome into the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, real good, real good. Thank you for having me on. I hear that my connection's not too good, and I've got to not do rapid movements. And as Scott knows, it's going to be very hard for me to just stay still. So
it's okay. Much worse things have happened. We still got the audio quality is picture perfect. So, Bryan, let's kind of get into this right now. Let's talk about Joomla. Kind of give me your thoughts and tell our viewers. What can you tell our viewers really about Joomla?
Okay, well, I really approach a lot of these, as far as the content management systems, more from a user point of view of what I really want to use. And I don't mean that as an expert trying to be like a user. I am a user. And so I really look as far as at Joomla. And going back to your show last month where Scott's talking about how do you select a CMS, what he's really talking about there in the process is it's more than software. There's a whole ecosystem there that you have to watch for and be enthusiastic about. And that's what Joomla is. Joomla is basically, I would say, three things. It's software, it's community, and it's a business. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. It's a little bit of all three as far as on those things. And Joomla, as far as on the software side, the current main version is 2.5. 3.0 was just released. Joomla folks are recommending that if you're interested in a production server today, you look at Joomla 2.5. If you're interested in what's coming down the road and what's currently being developed, or you're an early adopter, the 3.0 is just great to look towards that direction. And as you mentioned, Joomla is a PHP-based system, and it's also open source. And so on those aspects, it's also, as far as database-wise, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, and also in the 3.0 version, Postgres. So you have some choices there. You have choices as far as what type of web server, whether it's Apache, Microsoft IIS, or kind of the upcoming Nginx, which is becoming more and more popular. So you have as far as those aspects for the software, and just like most content management systems, you do have as far as the ability to do things like blogs and pages, and it has caching and syndication type abilities and those type of things. But what's also great about Joomla is it's got extensions. It has over 10,000, I think you mentioned it, 10,000 extensions that you can download. Now, one of the things that Joomla has on extensions is that's kind of an overall description for such things as components, modules, plugins, templates, languages. And what all that means is if you have a need that Joomla Core cannot do something for you, I guarantee you there's an ability to go ahead and find that extension.
Bryan, real quick question though. I mean, one of the things you talk about here is some of the different extensions. Now, talk about the features, because that's what a lot of viewers really want to know by comparison specifically to other open source platforms. Where are Joomla's features that really excel by comparison to, say, WordPress, to say Acquia?
Well, it's as far as if you go to as far as the Joomla extension directory, and you can take a look as far as on those. They excel in as far as in various areas. What a lot of developers have done is they've done things where they make Joomla into inventory control system, an application bridge. They've allowed things, for example, as far as e-commerce. One of the first e-commerce module or extensions that were available was called VirtueMart, and there's a lot more now since that came out. And every one of the first ones that you really were impressed that it was integrated into a content management system. So it excels as far as quite a few areas on the features there. So that's the so it can excel almost in everywhere. It's kind of directed more towards as far as web content management systems, and it's also directed as far as more on the internet side. Now, I want to make sure everyone realizes, though, it can do other things too, as far as from some larger sites. But I think it really excels as far as for small businesses that are looking for a presence online, and the Joomla community is there to help.
Awesome. Bryan Ruby, great stuff, Bryan. Well, for the folks out there who want to get in touch with you, where can people actually find you right now? Where's the best place to reach you? I know you're pretty much all over the place, but where's the best spot?
I have a website called cmsreport.com, and I also have as far as I'm on Twitter, CMS Report, and I'm also as far as available on Google+. It's kind of my favorite social network right now.
Awesome. I love it. Bryan Ruby, excellent stuff indeed, Bryan. We'll definitely catch up again very soon.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. That right there, Bryan Ruby. So this is In the Spotlight. We're continuing the discussion and the conversation about Joomla right now. Scott, I want to bring you back into the equation. Kind of give me your thoughts, from a company standpoint. I mean, what's kind of going on behind the scenes, really?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, Joomla is not a company, right? So
yeah.
Joomla is a project. It's the Joomla project. It's a community,
yeah.
exactly as Bryan started to talk about. So it's kind of like, this is open source in its purest sense, almost. It started out as a fork of another project called Mambo back in, 2005, 2006, something like that. Andrew Eddy was one of the sponsors of that, and it's essentially committee run. It's got a kind of a project development team of folks, and it's committee run, elected folks who are officers of that committee, and so therefore, there's not always as clear of a path for the product, right? Because there's not a single person or a single, certainly they're not IPO driven or something like we were talking about earlier about to go public is much more difficult here where you have certain demands. They don't have really any demands on them other than those of the millions of people who are users. So sometimes, it's not really clear to see exactly where they're going because it is such a heterogeneous environment led by so many. So there's some folks at the top, and then there's all the contributors have a voice as well.
Now, what's your honest opinion of them? Because what's interesting, we've talked about open source obviously before here on the show, and we always seem to go to kind of the suspects of WordPress and Acquia, and Drupal, but we haven't really touched upon Joomla all that much. What's kind of your thoughts?
Hearing you say that now, I think that's too bad. I think that's bad on us because it's certainly a very relevant tool out there. Yeah. So if we kept, maybe to be honest with you, something like a Drupal keeps coming to mind more because it's got an entity like an Acquia out there at the forefront, kind of pushing it, and they're doing things that kind of more the commercial and proprietary vendors are doing. They're having analyst relations. They're making sure that folks understand what the product can do. Maybe they're not telling you what it can't do, but what it does and what it doesn't do. It's more kind of prevalent, whereas Joomla really is this kind of like groundswell of a bunch of people who all have an interest in it growing and improving, and so therefore they're trying to push and promote the product. Not always in the same way, not always for the same rationale. They don't always have a consistent message. So sometimes it is difficult. It's but there are a lot. I mean, the community is extremely strong. You go to Chicago, you go to Boston, and they have these Joomla groups that have formed up that are really well attended by a bunch of some people are developers on the product. People have staked their entire business on the platform. There are 4 for-profit companies that have used the source code as a substance underneath their own product that they're offering. You have ultimate end users, so you have a lot of people who are interested in seeing this thing succeed. But again, the message is not always exactly clear. So it's a much more ambiguous, continuously evolving tool. So.
All right. Very interesting indeed. That right there, folks, is in the spotlight with Joomla. So now it's time to move on to our very last segment of the show, and that is rapid fire. We basically put a minute up on the board and we allow Scott to kind of go through some of the different topics up there. So let's go ahead and let's kind of get this thing started and get this thing rolling. First off, let's talk about heads of state changes. This is actually kind of two stories in one, Scott, so you definitely have your work cut out for you. Open source document management vendor Alfresco is actually going for an IPO in the US and has appointed a new CEO, Doug Dennerlein, who will replace Alfresco founder and current CEO John Powell. And meanwhile, Episerver, a global software provider for innovative digital marketing and e-commerce solutions, announced actually yesterday that Marty Lerney, I believe, will join the company as president of Episerver US. Pretty interesting announcements, and you've got two of them that you have to kind of touch upon right now in this minute.
30 seconds each. I can divide. So no, I think this is, it's interesting news on the Alfresco front, and I received this notice from them as well. I don't know Doug Dennerlein, but I think it's interesting that they are positioning themselves for an IPO. You kind of knew that they would eventually, but we talked about this earlier on in the show, is that essentially really changes the stance on the company, and they've got a whole lot more challenges, much like a Facebook, that they've got to kind of meet market needs now. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think they're facing kind of constant struggle where they tend to they've said that maybe they aren't as much of a WCM-oriented firm as they are kind of more ECM-oriented, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think on the Episerver side, they've been without AJ Herring for a few months now, and so to have somebody kind of back at the helm now who is not also trying to act as chief marketing officer, they really do need that in the US. Episerver is a great product, but they've really needed to make a good, solid push, and their strategy's got to be driven by somebody, so I think it's a good hire.
All right, moving on, let's talk about the Cody Awards. The finalists have actually been announced with Adobe, Sitecore, Bridgeline, and T4 making the cut. The finalists is actually going to be announced on January 31st. What are your thoughts on this year's finalists?
So I have a personal relationship with the Cody Awards. It actually started out, I kind of called them out on a tweet last year when the winner of this particular category in content management was not a traditional content management vendor at all. And I was like, what's going on? Codys have great respect, but in our category, they haven't always necessarily. It's kind of been up in arms. So they actually said, then come on and be a judge. So I recruited a bunch of judges. A number of them are from DCG. And we basically went out and I asked a number of the CMS vendors to kind of join and kind of position themselves for the award. And so I think we looked at a lot of really good tools. And so to see it come down to Bridgeline and Adobe and Sitecore and Terminal 4, I think those are great. It's great recognition for them. I think it does great things for the Cody Awards and for SIAA because they really get, I think they'll have a good winner in any of those. And I think it's great for the people to now really, truly value the Cody Award in the CMS industry. So I'm happy to see it happen. We need it.
All right, speaking of awards, the moment we've all been waiting for, the award for Scott Liewehr. Apparently, you've been nominated for a Shorty Award. You have 1 minute to talk about yourself, I guess. Go ahead, Scott.
Gosh, is this really right now? Wow. So, yeah, I guess I was nice enough to have been nominated for the Shorty Award. I hadn't even heard of it before, but the Shorty Awards.
It's not hype-based, right?
Is it shortyawards.com? Do we have that URL? Anyway, I think it's shortyawards.com. Oh, look, there it is. So it's basically it's not just video. It's for this show that we're doing it. It's on the webcast category, and it's a social media essentially award for folks who are there's a category in blogging, there's a category in sports, there's a category in all sorts of things, and so I was nominated actually for doing this show. So we'd appreciate your support. I suppose there's some pretty strict requirements for how to vote. It's open till February 10th. And you have to go on there and click, I nominate so-and-so because, and you have to have a specific reason why. So I don't know, check it out. But it was nice to be nominated. I think you should have been nominated for it too.
Definitely is.
Yeah, pretty. I don't know, interesting. See, look at that. The only time I've ever come up short on a 1-minute thing because it's about myself. So I think it's good.
Fair enough, fair enough. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about enterprise WordPress. Now, we actually kind of talked about open source and enterprise a little bit earlier on in the show, but now Automatic, the company behind WordPress, has actually introduced a new enterprise web content management service at a pretty attractive price point. For $500 per site per month, customers get unlimited traffic, bandwidth, and storage on the WordPress platform. Price also includes support. Is it a game changer, Scott?
Is it a game changer? I think that, to be honest with you, anything that WordPress does is relatively game changing in this space, because I think WordPress is the entry point, I think, oftentimes for many into the CMS world and into kind of maturing in the way of managing your content, managing your relationship with your audience, managing what it is that you have to say. So there were certainly many that were using it in the smaller businesses, and they certainly realized that. I've said before that we use it at Digital Clarity Group, and unfortunately they've changed something, and so our blog is actually down at this moment. So maybe I should sign up for that support and I wouldn't have had that problem. But it is interesting to see them specifically position themselves for the enterprise. I think, once again, this is constant where everyone is trying to move up into the enterprise. All of these vendors, whether they're open source or not, they're all trying to kind of move upwards. So I think it's very good news that some of those who have looked at it and built their businesses on WordPress now have a way to kind of get thorough and tested support.
All right, let's go ahead and let's move on and let's talk about Acquia once again right now. And Acquia made a big hire in Tom Wentworth from Ectron as their new CMO after a very long search. So Tom actually sent us a quote, so I'm going to go ahead and read what his thoughts were, Tom's thoughts were. I'm thrilled to be joining Acquia. I've spent most of my career working at commercial CMS companies, and I grew to realize that CMS vendors were spending more time building features to compete with each other than trying to solve real-world customer problems. I joined Acquia because I believe open source is a better way to build software. The open source community doesn't get distracted by the allure of solving niche problems, just differentiate against other CMS vendors. Instead, the company builds solutions to real-world problems, resulting in better products, better economics, and more freedom for customers. I look forward to sharing more about Acquia's open cloud platform for integrated digital experiences vision in 2013. Kind of give me your thoughts on all of this.
Well, as I get over that statement by Tom there, no, it's great. I mean, look, Tom is an awesome guy. He's a great marketer. He's had great success over at Ectron, and I think he'll continue to have great success over at Acquia. So there is no question in my mind that I think this is a great hire. It means for me a number of things, though. Number one, with Tom's statement there, I think he was fully behind the proprietary stance before that. So I have a little bit of cynicism there, but it's kind of much like sports athletes who are all about their team until they get hired by the next team. This is a business. That being said, I think what this means for Acquia is, in my mind, I think where they've stood is, I don't think they necessarily understood where they didn't stack up as well, where the Drupal platform didn't necessarily stack up as well to the enterprise platforms. And they always thought that they could handle as complex systems, situations as their proprietary counterparts. I think they had blinders on with that. I think Tom will help to shed those blinders, as with Joe Wykes, who was hired a couple of months by them as well. So I think it's a good hire for them.
All right, let's move on to the very last topic in rapid fire right now, and that is the 10 best internets in 2013. And as kind of a precursor, just to let you all know that February's show is actually going to be all about internet solutions, so make sure to tune into that. So going into this, basically this article right now, the Nielsen Norman Group has announced its list of the 10 best internets for 2013. And for those that thought internets were a little bit of passé, so to speak, it seems that social features and information filtering are creating considerable appeal, particularly among large companies where the size of internet teams have actually doubled right now. But what's actually pretty interesting about this, Scott, is that SharePoint is actually playing a substantial role, with 70% of the winners using SharePoint with what Nielsen describes as extensive customization. What kind of thoughts on this one?
Boy, you can go a lot of directions with that one. I think first and foremost, for the intranet space, for those, especially vendors who have kind of forgotten the intranet space, it is absolutely, when we talk about engagement, we're not just talking about engaging consumers, we're also talking about engaging employees. And intranets play a huge role in that. And so I think it really has become, the bar has been raised as it has for the consumers, the bar has been raised for employers to really provide an environment that's going to foster collaboration, that's going to foster ways to get work done better. And so when we talk about a social commercial enterprise, it's not just kind of to allow them to have relations at work and have more water cooler chat. It really is about getting business done in kind of the new age and with the new disruption and tools. So I think these are good examples of that. SharePoint's place in it, I think that's actually quite good. I think SharePoint is best positioned for this sort of a role and less so for the kind of external facing sites. But yes, lots of customization. We've talked before about the 10x model with that. So any SharePoint project is going to require a lot of customization.
Awesome, good stuff. Another great show in the books, huh?
Yeah, man, that was good.
Definitely, it's a great show indeed. So that's going to be doing it for us today here on CMS Connect. Well, thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Now, reminder to you, if you would like, we'd absolutely love you to go ahead and look just below the viewing screen, and you can go ahead and see how to select a Web CMS white paper that's out. It's based upon last month's show. Go to click on that, download it. It's got a lot of great information out there. So, for my co-host, Scott Liewehr, I am Tyler Piper. I want to thank everybody involved in the show, specifically Falcon Software, who helps put this show on, as well as Digital Clarity Group, and reminding you guys that it's all about internet solutions next month with a spotlight feature on CMS vendor Core Media. So make sure to mark your calendars and stay tuned for that show indeed. And also a big thanks to Cathy McKnight and Bryan Ruby. I am Tyler Piper of the Pulse Network. This has been CMS Connected. We'll see you next time.